The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and polished wood. The gallery, nestled between high-rise buildings in a bustling city, was a place where art met affluence. The soft hum of classical music filtered through the air, mingling with the whispers of cultured patrons discussing the latest pieces on display. Among the crowd, standing in the center of the room, was a young black artist, his fingers clenched into fists beneath the folds of his jacket. His name was Elias Johnson, and today was the day he would confront the art world's indifference. Elias had been an artist for years, but not in the traditional sense. His work was raw, passionate, and unconventional. His pieces were created from a combination of abstract expressionism and personal experiences, often drawing on themes of identity, race, and social struggles. Yet, despite the authenticity of his work, he had never gained the recognition he deserved. His art was sometimes dismissed as too bold or too controversial, and Elias often found himself on the fringes of the art community, as if his talent was somehow too powerful for the mainstream. Today, however, was different. He had secured an appointment with Julian Hayes, a renowned gallery owner who specialized in avant-garde art. Hayes' gallery had been the stepping stone for many artists, turning their humble exhibitions into lucrative careers. He was known for his sharp eye for talent, and even sharper tongue when it came to his critiques. Elias had prepared himself mentally for the meeting. He knew the risks of meeting a figure like Hayes, a man who had the power to make or break careers with just a word. But he had made it this far, and he wasn't going to back down now. As he walked through the polished glass doors of Hayes' gallery, he felt a mixture of excitement and unease. The modern design of the space was filled with minimalist sculptures and sleek paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum. Everything was pristine, and every inch of the space seemed to exude wealth. The white walls were dotted with paintings that conveyed wealth, power, and status, art that the wealthy patrons could relate to, art that made them feel cultured and refined. Elias scanned the room, trying to make sense of the sea of faces around him. His eyes settled on Julian Hayes, who stood in front of one of the gallery's most prominent pieces, a vibrant, abstract painting by a famous European artist. Hayes was a man in his mid-40s, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed luxury. His salt and pepper hair was combed back neatly, and his sharp eyes seemed to miss nothing. He was the picture of confidence, and Elias could already feel a sense of trepidation creeping up his spine. Hayes noticed him immediately, his piercing gaze scanning Elias from head to toe. Elias, dressed in simple, worn jeans and a black hoodie, could feel the judgment radiating from the gallery owner. He knew he didn't fit the mold of the typical artist who walked through these doors. "Mr. Johnson, I presume?" Hayes' voice was smooth, almost patronizing, as he extended a hand in greeting. "You must be the artist I've heard so much about." Elias took his hand, feeling the cold grip of businesslike professionalism. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Hayes." Hayes gave a slight nod, his lips curling into a thin smile. Of course. I'm always interested in discovering new talent." He gestured toward a nearby table where several of Elias's pieces were displayed. "Let's have a look at your work, shall we?" As Elias placed his portfolio on the table, he could feel Hayes' eyes on him, scrutinizing his every move. Elias had spent years perfecting his craft, and every piece in his portfolio held a story, stories of struggle, resistance, and the strength to rise above adversity. There were vibrant paintings of faces twisted in anguish, others depicting surreal landscapes that told of fractured identities, and a series of mixed media works that used broken mirrors and shards of glass to reflect the complexities of race and society. Hayes remained silent as he flipped through the pages, his face unreadable. Elias stood there, his hands clenched by his sides, waiting for the inevitable judgment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Hayes looked up, his expression hardening. Interesting," he said, his voice laced with thinly veiled disdain. "Your work is raw. But I'm not sure it fits with the direction we're taking here." Elias's heart sank. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to mask the disappointment in his voice. "Well, let's be honest, Mr. Johnson. These pieces, they're too gritty, too unrefined." The art world isn't looking for controversy right now. What we need are more sophisticated, elegant pieces. Something that speaks to the wealthy patrons who frequent this gallery. Something that aligns with their tastes, Hayes said, as he set down the last piece of artwork and adjusted his cufflinks. Elias's stomach churned. He had heard it all before, the rejection, the critique of his art being too bold or too political. It was a familiar song. But hearing it from someone who held so much influence stung even more. I see, Elias said, forcing a calm tone. So, you don't think my work has value? Hayes's lips twitched into a tight smile. Well, that's a bit harsh. It's just not what our clientele is looking for right now. I think you'd have better luck finding a gallery that's more experimental or cutting edge. But don't get me wrong, you've got talent. Just not the kind that can sell for millions. The words hit like a slap to the face. Elias stood still, swallowing the anger that bubbled up inside him. He could feel the weight of the moment, the humiliation settling deep within his chest. He had always known that his work was unconventional, but hearing Hayes, the supposed tastemaker of the art world, dismiss it so easily made him question everything. He forced himself to smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hayes. I'll keep that in mind. As Elias turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. The gallery owner had no idea who he was, or what his work truly represented. To Hayes, he was just another artist, just another person trying to break into the elitist world of fine art. What he didn't know was that Elias's art was already worth millions, not in the way Hayes imagined, but in the way it resonated with those who saw the value in raw, honest expression. Elias stepped out of the gallery, the cool air of the city hitting him like a breath of fresh air. His mind raced as he walked down the busy street, replaying the encounter over and over again. But as he passed the towering buildings, something inside him hardened. He was done being underestimated. The world didn't know what it was missing, and he was going to show them. The moment Hayes had mocked him, he had unknowingly sealed his own fate. Elias would rise above the art world's prejudices. And he would make sure Hayes learned exactly why he had underestimated a black artist who wasn't afraid to stand his ground. After the encounter at the gallery, Elias walked down the street, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Humiliation, anger, and disappointment all churned within him, yet beneath those feelings was something else, a quiet sense of determination. He had always known that the art world was a battleground, a place where only the most polished, the most acceptable, the most marketable artists thrived. But Elias was not like the others. He wasn't interested in fitting into a mold. For years, Elias had been working in the shadows, creating art that pushed boundaries, art that was meant to make people think, to make them feel uncomfortable, to challenge the status quo. And though he had never sought the limelight, there was one thing he had never shared with anyone, the truth about the success of his art. Elias had been selling his work for years, but not through the typical galleries. His art had found a different audience, one that saw the value in raw, unfiltered expression. The world he inhabited wasn't the polished, high society world of Julian Hayes. It was the underground, the alternative spaces, the galleries that were hungry for new perspectives. But even in those circles, Elias's work had commanded exorbitant prices. He wasn't a starving artist. He had a reputation, but it was a reputation that was carefully hidden behind a veil of anonymity. No one knew that Elias Johnson was the artist behind the pieces that were fetching millions in private auctions, no one except for a select few. He had deliberately kept his identity under wraps, understanding that being a black artist in the upper echelons of the art world often meant battling preconceived notions. The anonymity gave him control over how his art was perceived, free from the judgments that often came with his race. But today, after being belittled by Hayes, Elias had reached his breaking point. He had decided it was time to step out of the shadows, to show the world exactly who he was, and to prove that his art wasn't just worth millions, it was priceless. As Elias made his way home, he thought about the next steps. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his friend and fellow artist, Lena, who had helped him sell his work anonymously in the past. "You okay? I heard about the gallery. Don't let them get to you. You know what you're worth." Elias stared at the message for a moment. He appreciated Lena's words, but they didn't hit home in the same way they used to. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was determined. He quickly typed a reply. "I'm fine. Actually, I've decided to make a move. I'm going to buy a spot in that gallery." Lena's response was almost immediate. "Wait, what? You're serious?" Elias smiled as he typed his next message. "Yep. I'm done being underestimated. If they don't see my worth, I'll show them. I'll be the one in control this time." Lena's message came through, punctuated with a string of question marks. "Okay, I'll help you however I can. But you've got to promise me one thing, you're not going to let your anger cloud your judgment. If you do this, it's not just about getting back at him. It's about showing the world who you are. You know what you're doing, Elias. Just don't forget the bigger picture." Elias took a deep breath. Lena was right, of course. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming his place in the art world, and not on anyone's terms but his own. The next morning, Elias made the call. He arranged to meet with a real estate agent who could help him secure a spot in Julian Hay's gallery. He wanted to ensure that his decision was calculated and strategic. He wasn't going to throw away his hard-earned money just to prove a point. This had to be more than just a petty gesture. It needed to be an investment. As he made the arrangements, Elias couldn't help but think back to his earlier days in the art world. He had struggled for years, painting in his small apartment, selling to collectors who valued his art but never truly understood it. He'd fought to be taken seriously, constantly fighting the narrative that his identity defined his art before the work itself could speak. But as his reputation grew, so did the prices for his pieces. Elias had never intended for it to get this big. He didn't crave fame. But there was something deeply satisfying about knowing that people who had once scoffed at his art were now willing to pay millions for the very same pieces they had dismissed. The world was finally beginning to recognize the value of what he had been creating all along. The agent arranged the details of the gallery space. As Elias sat in the small office, signing papers and making financial arrangements, he felt an exhilarating sense of purpose. This wasn't just about buying a gallery spot, it was about taking ownership of his future. No longer would he be relegated to the background of a world that didn't appreciate him. It was time to take center stage. After the meeting, Elias went straight home, where he began preparing his next move. He needed to assemble the perfect collection of pieces, works that would not only shock the art world but would redefine what was considered valuable. He had already begun planning the installation and how he would position himself as both artist and buyer. He would be the one in control this time, not the gallery owner who had dismissed him. But as he prepared, there was still a nagging thought in the back of his mind: what if this doesn't work? What if Hayes never acknowledges his worth, no matter what he does? Elias pushed that thought away. This wasn't about Hayes. This was about proving to himself that his art wasn't just valuable, it was essential. As the weeks passed, the plans began to take shape. The day Elias stepped into Hayes' gallery again, it would not be as an unknown artist hoping for a chance, it would be as a buyer with millions at his disposal, ready to show the world the true power of his work. The moment of confrontation was fast approaching, and Elias was ready. He had learned to trust himself, to trust the value of his art, and most importantly, to trust the idea that the world would see him as he was, not a token artist, not an exotic novelty, but a master of his craft. He smiled as he imagined the look on Julian Hayes' face when he realized exactly who he was. The days after Elias's meeting with Julian Hayes were filled with a quiet but unwavering resolve. Every morning, he woke up with the sense that something significant was on the horizon. The encounter at the gallery had stirred something in him, something deeper than just the desire for recognition. It was about taking ownership, about rewriting the narrative that had been imposed upon him for far too long. Elias had never sought to be a part of the high society world of art collectors and gallery owners. But now, he wasn't just hoping for acceptance. He was preparing to redefine what it meant to belong in that world. Elias had always preferred to keep a low profile. His work had circulated through underground auctions, private collectors, and online spaces where art was appreciated for its raw emotion and powerful messaging, rather than for its marketability. But Julian Hayes's dismissive attitude had ignited something in him, a hunger to take control of his own fate. The way Hayes had sneered at his art, belittling its worth, had crossed a line that Elias was unwilling to let go of. In that moment, Elias realized that he didn't need to chase after recognition, he could create his own. After his decision to buy a spot in the very gallery that had rejected him, Elias threw himself into preparing for the next step. It wasn't just about buying a physical space, it was about making a statement. He wasn't just any artist, he was one of the most sought-after contemporary talents in the world. He didn't need validation from someone like Hayes. But Elias wanted something more. He wanted to take the power from those who thought they could control the narrative and show them that art, in its purest form, was not bound by societal expectations. In the weeks that followed, Elias went through the process of securing the space. It wasn't easy. Julian Hayes's gallery was highly exclusive, and buying a spot wasn't as simple as just throwing money at the problem. The space Elias wanted was prime real estate in the heart of the art world. It was expensive and in demand, with few willing to sell their place in such an esteemed venue. But Elias wasn't just another artist, he had the means to make it happen. Through a combination of high-level negotiations and connections in the art world, Elias was able to secure a deal that allowed him to purchase the spot. The gallery was his, well, in a sense. He now had a platform from which to make his move. But before he could fully execute his plan, he needed to gather the pieces that would truly showcase his brilliance. Elias set to work assembling a new collection. His art had always been unconventional, but this new collection was going to challenge everything that had been said about his work. He would push the boundaries even further. He didn't want his art to just shock, he wanted it to provoke thought, to start conversations, to change perspectives. He would create pieces that would make people confront their own biases and prejudices, works that would not only resonate with the art world but with the larger societal issues that he had always fought against. The new collection was going to be both personal and universal. Some pieces would touch on the themes of identity, race, and struggle that had defined his earlier work. But there would be a shift in tone, more strength, more defiance, more power. It would be a celebration of survival, of overcoming the odds, and of embracing one's true self, despite the forces that tried to suppress it. Elias spent long hours in his studio, working tirelessly, perfecting every piece. He used a mixture of mediums, oil paints, mixed media, broken glass, mirrors, and charcoal. He wanted to push the concept of what art could be, to blur the line between visual art and emotional experience. Every brushstroke, every shard of glass, every splinter of wood was infused with meaning. Each piece felt like a small rebellion, a declaration that the artist was no longer going to remain in the shadows. He was ready. The day came when Elias finally stood before his completed collection, feeling the weight of each piece as if it had been carved directly from his soul. There was no doubt in his mind that these works were the most powerful he had ever created. Now, it was time to return to Hayes's gallery, not as a struggling artist trying to earn a place in the world, but as a buyer, a master, and a force that could not be ignored. The morning of the big reveal, Elias dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of quiet elegance, a far cry from the casual attire he had worn when he first visited the gallery. He had always felt like an outsider in the world of luxury fashion, but today, he wanted to show the world that he was as much a part of it as anyone else. He walked into the gallery with a calm, deliberate stride, his chest rising and falling steadily, his eyes focused ahead. As soon as he entered the space, the familiar scent of fresh paint and polished wood filled his senses. The gallery hadn't changed, everything was still pristinely arranged, the walls still lined with works that epitomized the established art world's ideals. But something about this moment felt different. This time, Elias wasn't walking in hoping to be seen, he was here to take his place. He was greeted by the gallery's receptionist, a young woman who looked up from her desk with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I'm here to speak with Mr. Hayes," Elias said, his voice steady. "I have an appointment." The receptionist blinked in surprise but quickly picked up the phone to inform Hayes. It was clear that she hadn't expected someone like Elias to be part of the usual clientele. But he didn't mind. The world didn't expect him, and that was exactly why he would succeed. A few moments later, Julian Hayes appeared, looking just as polished as ever, but something in his expression shifted when he saw Elias standing in the lobby. His eyes widened slightly, recognizing the face, though he couldn't place it. "Mr. Johnson?" Hayes said with an almost imperceptible sneer. "Back so soon, I see." Elias met his gaze, holding it for a moment before replying, "Yes, I'm here to finalize the arrangements." "Arrangements?" "I don't believe I'm purchasing a spot in your gallery," Elias interrupted calmly. "I'm the buyer for the upcoming exhibition." For a moment, Hayes stood in stunned silence, his face faltering in disbelief. You're the one?" Elias nodded. "I'll be showcasing my work here. My art. I believe you may find it valuable." The tension between them was palpable, but Elias didn't flinch. He had no need to explain himself any further. The gallery owner's arrogance was about to meet a much harsher reality. The first step was complete, Elias was here to stay. Now, he just had to show Julian Hayes and the art world why the real power had always been in his hands. The gallery space was alive with anticipation. The day of the exhibition had finally arrived, and the air inside Julian Hayes's high-end gallery crackled with excitement. The walls, once bare and untouched, were now adorned with a carefully selected collection of art pieces that were supposed to represent the pinnacle of creative genius. Hayes's latest show had promised to bring new talent to the forefront, with several renowned names in the art world expected to attend. Yet, as the clock ticked closer to the opening hour, no one had any idea what to expect. What they didn't know was that today, the true artist would be revealed, and it wasn't who they thought. Elias stood in front of the gallery, his reflection mirrored in the glass doors. He wore a sharp, custom-made suit, his presence commanding, though he didn't allow himself to appear boastful. He had worked for this moment. He had earned his place. But he knew better than to allow his outward appearance to reflect the deep emotions that ran beneath the surface. Today was not just about the art, it was about showing the world who he was. And he wasn't going to let anyone forget it. As he stepped inside, Elias felt a wave of familiarity wash over him. The gallery's polished walls, the sleek sculptures, and the array of abstract paintings, all the typical highbrow elements that represented the traditional art world, were present. But beneath the surface of it all, Elias knew that the moment was his. No one would leave this evening without knowing exactly who had changed the game. He walked past the front desk, where a pair of receptionists gave him a quick nod of acknowledgement. One of them was the same woman who had greeted him during his last visit. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty as she looked at him, perhaps recognizing him now, though she kept her thoughts to herself. Elias gave her a brief, but polite, smile as he moved deeper into the gallery. The space was already filling up with people, patrons dressed in extravagant designer outfits, collectors who saw the event as a way to add value to their social status, and critics who whispered among themselves about the merits of the latest works they were about to view. The air was thick with judgment, but Elias was unbothered. He was here for his art, and he was here to show them all that the art world had underestimated him. Julian Hayes appeared soon after, his eyes scanning the crowd as he greeted some of the gallery's most loyal clients. His expression remained polished, though there was a noticeable tension in his posture. The whole evening was a carefully orchestrated spectacle, designed to solidify his position as a tastemaker, a gatekeeper of the art world. Elias stood off to the side, patiently waiting for the moment to arrive. It was almost time. Finally, Hayes made his way over to Elias, his smile tight but somewhat strained. "Mr. Johnson, so glad you could make it. The exhibition is well, I trust you'll enjoy the showcase. A few of our more familiar artists are here today. You'll see some very interesting pieces, he said, his voice smooth and businesslike. Elias didn't flinch. I'm sure I'll find it enlightening, he replied, his words dripping with a slight edge. Of course, Hayes said, barely masking his discomfort. It's an exciting time. I'm certain the patrons will enjoy it. The show is designed to capture the essence of contemporary culture. It's very sophisticated, very, well, polished. Nothing like the roughness of your previous work, but I'm sure you'll appreciate it. Elias smiled, a knowing smile, but said nothing. He knew exactly what Hayes was implying. It wasn't just his art that was being dismissed, it was his identity as an artist. To Hayes, Elias's work was crude, too political, too controversial. To Elias, the art world's obsession with sophistication was just another way to silence voices like his. Hayes didn't expect what would happen next. The lights dimmed, and the crowd grew silent, anticipation hanging in the air like electricity. A few soft whispers traveled through the room, and then, without warning, the first of Elias's pieces was unveiled. A single spotlight cast its glow upon the first artwork, a mixed-media piece that combined shattered glass and charcoal. The jagged pieces of broken mirror caught the light, creating an intricate web of fractured reflections across the room. At the center of the piece, the viewer's reflection stared back at them, surrounded by images of a fractured world. It was a deliberate choice to show the world as broken, but to force those standing in front of it to see themselves as part of that world. The crowd fell silent. It wasn't the polished, controlled art that many had expected from the show. This was raw, unapologetic, and visceral. The glass shards seemed to cut into the viewer's reflection, almost as if the piece were daring them to confront their own complicity in the systems of oppression and inequality that defined the world around them. The crowd was still for a moment, unsure of how to respond. A few critics exchanged glances, their eyes wide as they tried to process what they were seeing. But it was the next piece that truly sent shockwaves through the gallery. A large canvas dominated the room. It was bold, vivid, and unapologetically large, its colors splashed in chaotic strokes. Faces, distorted and elongated, stared out from the canvas. Each figure seemed to emerge from a vortex of deep, swirling tones, red, black, and gold. The figures were not serene, not peaceful. They were strong, defiant, fierce. They were images of survival. The success of Elias's exhibition rippled through the art world like a shockwave. His work, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic, had forced the elite patrons and critics to take notice. No longer was he the struggling artist relegated to the fringes. No longer was he just a token figure, dismissed and overlooked. He had made an indelible mark on the gallery's walls, one that could not be erased by their old, tired expectations. However, not everyone in the art world shared this newfound admiration. Behind the facade of applause and praise, there were whispers of discomfort, of disapproval, and of resentment. Julian Hayes's gallery, despite the overwhelming success of Elias's show, was beginning to feel the pressure. For every patron who praised Elias's pieces, there was another who felt uneasy. The balance of power in the art world was shifting, and not everyone was ready for it. A few days after the exhibition, Elias found himself in the thick of it. What had started as a personal victory now had him at the center of a cultural storm. He had given the art world a new vision, one that many were not prepared for. Critics who had once praised him for his subtlety now called his work too political, too aggressive, and too confronting. Some said his art lacked the refinement that made it palatable to the upper echelons of society. Others tried to reduce his work to simple political statements, ignoring the deeper emotional layers and historical context embedded in every brushstroke. But Elias didn't flinch. He had always known that the price of challenging the system would be high, but it was a price he was willing to pay. Elias's phone rang one afternoon as he was in his studio, preparing for his next collection. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. Mr. Johnson, a voice on the other end said, smooth and calculating. I hope you're doing well after your successful exhibition. Elias recognized the voice immediately. It was Diana Moore, one of the top critics in the art world and a longtime supporter of Julian Hayes's gallery. She had never been a fan of Elias's earlier work, but her tone now was more neutral, even cordial. "I'm doing well, thank you," Elias replied, carefully keeping his voice steady. "How can I help you?" "I think you know why I'm calling," Diana continued. "Your recent exhibition has garnered quite a bit of attention. Some positive, some less so. We both know how these things work. The art world is a delicate ecosystem, and while it's clear you've made an impact, there are a few who believe your work could, well, alienate the very people who've supported you." Elias raised an eyebrow. He'd been expecting this conversation, but that didn't mean he was going to be intimidated. "I'm aware of the reactions, Diana. But I've made my intentions clear. My work is meant to challenge, to provoke, and to question the status quo. If that makes people uncomfortable, that's their issue, not mine." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You have a point. But consider this, Mr. Johnson, the people you're pushing away are the ones who control the market. They're the ones who decide what's valuable and what's not. If you continue down this path, you might find yourself with fewer opportunities in the future. The very gallery that gave you a platform might not be so welcoming next time." Elias's grip on the phone tightened, but he kept his voice even. "I'm not interested in compromising my vision for the sake of convenience. Art is supposed to challenge, not cower to the whims of the elite." Diana sighed, her tone softening just slightly. "You're an intelligent man, Elias. But intelligence doesn't always win in this world. There's power in influence, in connections, and in timing. You have talent, yes, but talent alone won't keep you relevant." "I'll take my chances," Elias replied. "But thank you for the advice." The line went silent for a moment, and Diana seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "I'm not saying this to discourage you, Elias. But you're playing a dangerous game. The art world doesn't take kindly to people who upset the apple cart." Elias's voice remained steady. "I've never been afraid of danger. And I've never been afraid to upset things." He hung up the phone, his mind whirring with the implications of the conversation. Diana Moore was right about one thing: the art world was a delicate balance of power, money, and influence. It wasn't just about creating art anymore, it was about navigating the politics of the elite, of placating the whims of the rich and powerful. And yet, Elias had no desire to play that game. He wasn't interested in bending to anyone's expectations. The whole reason he had started creating was to speak the truth, to tell his story, and to force others to reckon with the truths they so often ignored. As the days passed, Elias's thoughts turned inward. He realized that Diana's words weren't just an empty threat, they were a reflection of the reality he faced. But they also served as a catalyst for him to push even harder. There was no going back now. His art had become more than just a career, it had become a battleground. And just as he was preparing himself for the challenges ahead, another unexpected event threw the art world into chaos. Julian Hayes, the man who had once dismissed Elias as nothing more than a fringe artist, found himself in a precarious position. The backlash against Elias's work was growing. Patrons who had initially championed his pieces were now retracting their support, unwilling to be associated with the controversial nature of his art. Hayes's gallery, despite its prestige, was beginning to feel the pressure from collectors who demanded a more refined selection. In the world of high-end art, controversy could be as dangerous as it was valuable, and the line between genius and irrelevance was razor-thin. One afternoon, Elias received an email from Hayes's gallery. The subject line read, "Important, Exhibition Space Review." With a tight knot in his stomach, Elias opened the email, bracing himself for whatever was to come. The message was simple, but the implications were clear. Due to recent developments and the evolving direction of your work, the gallery has decided to reconsider the exhibition space for future shows. We regret to inform you that we will not be offering further opportunities at this time. We wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. Elias closed the email slowly, a wry smile curling on his lips. It had been inevitable, but it didn't sting the way he had imagined it would. Instead, it fueled him. He was no longer interested in relying on others for validation. If the art world wasn't ready for his truth, then it was time to create his own path. Elias didn't need the gallery to succeed. He didn't need their approval. He had already proven that his art was valuable in ways they couldn't comprehend, ways that went beyond their narrow definitions of success. The art world may have rejected him, but Elias Johnson was no longer just a rebel on the outside. He was a force within it, and he was ready to redefine it all. The art world was, in a word, fickle. One day, you were the toast of the town, the next, you were forgotten in the shadows. For most artists, rejection from a prestigious gallery could spell the end of their career. But Elias had never been one to bow to convention. In fact, rejection was just fuel to his fire. After the email from Julian Hayes's gallery, Elias found himself sitting in the solitude of his studio, surrounded by canvases, sculptures, and sketches. His work had always been a reflection of his personal journey, of the struggles and triumphs, the pain and resilience. He had never intended to make art that fit neatly into the boxes of acceptable or refined. His art was meant to challenge the viewer, to make them question everything they had believed about the world around them. The gallery's decision, while disappointing, didn't shake him. If anything, it gave him the clarity to realize that his path would never be about fitting in. It would be about standing out. Elias picked up his phone and opened his social media. He hadn't used it much in the past, preferring to keep his personal life private and his work to speak for itself. But now, he saw an opportunity. He began posting snippets of his art, his thoughts, and his frustrations. Each post was a declaration of independence, an expression of the frustration he felt with the art establishment that tried to control what was worthy and what was not. The posts ranged from photos of his boldest pieces to short video clips explaining the deeper meaning behind his work. He spoke about the struggle of being a Black artist in a predominantly white-dominated world, about the importance of reclaiming narratives, and about the healing power of art that challenged oppression. He wasn't holding back anymore. The world needed to hear his voice, and he was determined to make sure they did. Within days, Elias's social media presence exploded. What had started as a small following of admirers grew rapidly. People from all walks of life, from other artists, to activists, to everyday people who had never even considered the art world, began sharing his posts. The #RebelArtist movement, as it was quickly dubbed, took off, and it wasn't long before people began to see Elias as more than just an artist, they saw him as a revolutionary. Elias's followers began to form a community, a collective of people who were tired of the elitism and conformity that governed the art world. They wanted something real, something raw, something that didn't just cater to the whims of the rich and powerful. And Elias was ready to give it to them. But not everyone was happy about the shift in the art world. Julian Hayes's gallery, still reeling from the fallout of Elias's exhibition, issued a public statement distancing themselves from his political art. Hayes, ever the businessman, tried to protect his brand from any further damage. "Thank you, Diana," he began, his voice calm but firm. "It's an honor to be here today. I'm not here to just talk about technique or color theory. I'm here to talk about what art really is. Art is power. It's a tool for revolution. It's a weapon against oppression, against the systems that have kept marginalized voices silent for far too long." The crowd was silent, unsure of how to react. But Elias didn't care. He wasn't here to win anyone's approval. He was here to make them listen. "I create because I have a story to tell," he continued. "I create because my existence, as a Black man, is political. Every stroke of paint, every shattered piece of glass, every word I say, it all comes from a place of resistance. And I refuse to apologize for it." The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the audience shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Others were leaning in, captivated by Elias's words. By the end of the panel, Elias had not only made his mark, he had forced the art world to reckon with the future of art itself. No longer would they be able to ignore the voices of artists who dared to defy the rules. The world had changed, and Elias was at the center of that transformation. As the panel wrapped up, Elias felt a sense of pride. He had taken his power back from those who tried to silence him. He had created a movement that was bigger than any gallery, bigger than any critic. His work was a testament to the resilience of people who had been told they didn't belong. The days following the art symposium were a blur for Elias. His appearance at the panel had ignited a firestorm of conversation that extended far beyond the art world. Social media buzzed with debates, articles were written, and both critics and fans weighed in on what Elias had said. The narrative he had crafted, the narrative of art as resistance, as power, as truth, was beginning to take root. But Elias wasn't interested in the fleeting nature of fame. He knew that the art world's attention span was short, and he wasn't in it for the accolades. His art had always been about something deeper than recognition. It had been about fighting against the systems that sought to oppress and define him. It had been about speaking to the silenced, elevating the marginalized, and using his platform to amplify the voices of those who had been pushed to the edges. Elias returned to his studio, where his canvases awaited. The pressure of the spotlight was real, but it didn't change his purpose. Every new piece he created was an extension of his fight, a bold declaration that he would not be cowed by the whims of the elite or the establishment. The work came easier now, fueled by the energy of the movement he had sparked. As he worked, Elias's influence continued to grow. Major art institutions began to reach out, eager to exhibit his work. But Elias wasn't ready to play by their rules. He had seen how they operated, how they controlled narratives, how they tried to sanitize the power of art, and how they profited off of the struggles of marginalized communities. He had no intention of letting them co-opt his message. Instead, Elias began to focus on creating his own spaces, his own platforms, where his art could be viewed without the constraints of gallery politics. He teamed up with other artists who shared his vision, creating collective exhibitions that highlighted the raw, unfiltered power of art as a form of resistance. These exhibitions were held in unconventional spaces, abandoned warehouses, community centers, and even public parks. The idea was to bring art to the people, to allow them to experience it on their own terms. The success of these exhibitions was undeniable. People from all walks of life, from activists to students to working-class families, attended these shows. They weren't just admiring the art, they were engaging with it. They were talking about the messages behind the pieces, discussing the social and political issues that had inspired the works. Elias had succeeded in turning art into a conversation, a space where people could come together and reflect on the state of the world. As the months passed, Elias's reputation continued to grow. He had become a symbol of defiance, of artistic freedom, and of empowerment. But despite the widespread admiration, he never lost sight of his core beliefs. He refused to be co-opted, refused to be molded into the acceptable version of an artist. His work remained as raw and as real as it had ever been. But Elias's impact wasn't just about art anymore. He had become a cultural force, a leader in a movement that spanned far beyond the canvas. His name was synonymous with resistance, and his story became an inspiration to others who sought to break free from the constraints of the systems that sought to define them. One evening, as Elias stood in front of his latest piece, a towering sculpture made of reclaimed materials, depicting the image of a clenched fist, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. It had been a long, difficult road, filled with rejection and struggle. But it had also been a journey of empowerment, of reclaiming his own narrative, and of finding his true voice. As he stood there, taking in the sculpture's intricate details, he felt a sense of peace. He had created something that would endure. It wasn't just a piece of art, it was a symbol of everything he had fought for, of all the voices that had been silenced, of all the struggles that had been ignored, and of the unyielding power of art to change the world. Elias's phone rang. It was a familiar number, Diana Moore. He hadn't spoken to her since the panel, and he wondered what she wanted now. Elias, Diana's voice came through the line, a note of respect in her tone. I've been following your work, and I think it's time we had another conversation. Elias chuckled softly. What's on your mind? You've become something bigger than just an artist, she said. You've become a cultural leader. The things you're doing, they're changing the conversation, Elias. People are listening. Elias's smile faded slightly. I didn't do this for accolades, Diana. I did it because the world needed to hear the truth. My truth. I know, she replied. But I think we both know that the truth is a powerful thing. And sometimes, the world doesn't know how to handle it. Elias looked around his studio, at the art that surrounded him. He thought about all the people who had come to his exhibitions, all the conversations that had sparked from his work. He had created something that mattered. He had created a legacy. I don't know what the future holds, Diana, he said slowly. But I do know this, I won't stop. Art is my weapon, and it's the only one I have. I understand, she said. And I want to help you take that weapon further. There's more we can do together. People need to hear your message, Elias. The world needs to hear it. For a moment, Elias was silent. Then he spoke, his voice firm. I don't need the establishment to validate me anymore. I built my own platform. I built my own movement. And I'm not going to let anyone stop me. Diana paused before responding. I know. But sometimes, the biggest changes come from unexpected places. And I think you're ready to take it to the next level. Elias thought for a moment, then nodded. Let's do it. Let's make sure this legacy isn't just mine. Let's make it all of ours. And with that, Elias Johnson took the next step in his journey, a journey that was far from over. His art, his message, and his movement were about to reach even greater heights. The world wasn't ready for the change he was bringing. But they would have no choice but to listen. The legacy of rebellion had only just begun,